Welcome to our program, The Real World with Elder George. Just a reminder that the three requirements for a happy, healthy, and harmonious human environment are spiritual awareness, gender understanding, and family focus. My last video addressed the huge prison population of our country and the primary causative factor, the civil rights legislation of the 1960s. Today, I will further describe how this legislation negatively impacted our society. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson introduced what became known as Great Society legislation, which enabled a person who was not elderly or disabled to receive need-based aid from the federal government. That gave the government the wedge necessary to dismantle the family and any communal influence while increasing the government's control of the lives of the people. A disproportionate share of these government programs went to black people, or seemed to. Why? As mentioned in my mini-book, The Re-Enslavement of the African American, the socio-economic condition of the African American was at an all-time high. I'm going to read from its preface, as I did in the last video. This is my booklet here. Now, I'm reading to you from the foreword, actually. The primary issue facing the African American in the United States is not racism, even though it exists, but the suppression of the masculine influence, which caused the destruction of the family, resulting in governmental intrusion into every facet of African American life. In 1965, the well-being of the African American was at its zenith. The unwed motherhood rate was 25%, high for the time, but low when compared to the destruction of the family that occurred during slavery. His economic level improved gradually, not only in the industrial North, but in the South as well, where he owned businesses, hotels, and banks, even though he did not receive any governmental assistance while laboring under the indignity and restriction of segregation. By the year 2000, the unwed motherhood rate among African Americans had risen to 70%. And in some pockets, such as Harlem, it reached 90%. The prison population more than doubled, with most of the increase coming from the African American community. Black inner cities became large de facto matriarchies, with nonprofit organizations providing aid and influence to every aspect of African American life. The Civil Rights Act and the Great Society legislation emasculated the male, destroyed the family, and re-enslaved black people. The government and media responsible for creating this condition fanned the fires of racism in order to draw the nation's attention away from their actions. This little book will describe how this re-enslavement was accomplished. What happened? Why did a disproportionate amount of welfare recipients come from the black community when it was doing so well? Why did the family break down? Why did the socioeconomic condition of the black community deteriorate? I didn't hear any explanation from the black community or the white community. I didn't hear explanations from the liberals or the conservatives. What happened? The American prison population soared from 250,000, right, 250,000 in 1976 to 2 million by the year 2000. That was a phenomenon, an increase of 1.75 million men in a quarter of a century. We weren't at war. Where did all these prisoners come from? And why? These prisoners were the effects of the welfare program instituted by government and available to all people, but specifically promoted among the African Americans. National out-of-wedlock births jumped from 5% in 1965 to 32% in 1997 to 40% today. That's a national average. Let's get this clear. When welfare was started in 1964, 19% of black children came from out-of-wedlock births. 2 generations later, the percentage increased to 68%. Welfare destroyed the black family. Let's also look at the white family. In 1964, 2% of white children came from out-of-wedlock births. 2 generations later, 23% of white children came from out-of-wedlock births. That's more than a 10-fold increase. Welfare destroyed the white family. After 40 years of welfare, the white family had more out-of-wedlock births than the black family did at the start of Great Society legislation. Every ethnic and racial group suffered similar declines in the familial structure. This was done by destroying the influence of men and substituting it with governmental control. The breakdown of the African American was caused by government design. It led to the phenomenally high rate of incarceration that is still with us, and how it was done will be discussed in detail in future videos. For now, know this fact: male influence in America was destroyed. It was destroyed by kicking the man out of the house through welfare and making women and children dependent upon the government. Secondly, Great Society legislation decreed that there is no difference between men and women, thus destroying the natural patriarchal relationship necessary for family development. Let's see what our mini book says about that on page 8. All right, I'm turning to page 8. The government fulfilled its promise to welfare women. It did train and educate them. It gave them preferential consideration in hiring over the men whom they didn't educate and train. The women went to work, and the men went to prison, and or ended up on the dole. An example being the food bank in Harlem, administered by government-educated black women with their doctorate, master's, and bachelor's degrees. But black men can be found at the street level, standing in line for a free meal. The condition is repeated in every black inner city community in America. Great Society legislation caused a national disaster, and as we will see eventually, a worldwide disaster. My brothers and sisters, the destruction of male influence in society and replacing it with governmental control will be a large part of my message from now on. Government control is the opposite of spiritual awareness, gender understanding, and family focus. I will go into more specifics of government efforts to break down the family in future videos. Until then, I ask that you avail yourselves of a copy of my mini-book, The Re-Enslavement of the African American, and review it frequently. It explains in detail how our government uses the tactics of the slave owners to control us. They sell for $3 each, and $1 for postage and handling. Perhaps you would consider buying them in bulk and distributing them within your sphere of influence. You might consider bringing in, say, 50 books for starters. That will only be $2.50 a book with freight included. We pay the freight. If you check with mini books on the home page of my website, you will find discounts for as many as 3,000. Please order what you can and share them with your family, friends, acquaintances, homeschooling organizations, distributors to hairdressers and to barbershops, fraternal, political, and religious organizations. We need to get the information out so that people will better understand what is happening to themselves and society, and thus take the steps necessary to make change in their personal lives. I hope to hear from you. Working together, we will survive. Until next time. Dear viewer, an important part of my message is an explanation of gender, the principle of gender, and it is elaborated on in my two books, A Gender Handbook for Western Man and Dear Brothers and Sisters, Gender and Its Responsibility. The first book, Dear Brothers and Sisters, Gender and Its Responsibility, discusses the many facets of gender and points out that it is a universal principle. The second book, A Gender Handbook for Western Man, is not really a handbook, but I explained gender in more technical terms, which I thought would be better appreciated by the Western mind. Both of these books are readily available from Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. I recommend that you get a copy of each and familiarize yourself with the principle of gender, which is being ignored in society today, and we are paying a price. Thank you.